Okay, the major news today is that the patch that they said they were going to be releasing has a lot of changes, including monster density. There's even one change they didn't mention in the patch notes, which is that your horse is going to be able to blast through barricades when you hit the space bar. That's awesome. There's major changes to like Sorcerer, Barbarian, unique items, affixes are being changed a little bit, etc. So we're going to break all that down and more. Let's get going. Looks like we have the patch notes have just been released. We're going to be going through each one of these classes in detail on the live stream directly after posting this video. So if you want to see and talk about all of these, you can find that in the description, the pinned comment, if you have any particular questions. But essentially, this is what they talked about in the previous campfire chat. They said they were going to try to stick to improving both the Sorcerer as well as the Barbarian. And you can see what they say is they want to improve the Sorcerer's late game survivability and also adjust some of the class mechanics so that when you get some power in other areas, you're not necessarily taking it away from other areas in order to accomplish that. They want it to feel better going into the late game. They also said they want to strengthen builds that aren't reaching a high power level and diversify the use cases for legendary items and other effects. So we're going to briefly just kind of scroll through these and see if they're sticking to what they already said with their patch notes. These look basically all the same. The Fury increase, the adding the Berserking, the vulnerable duration, and then some significant increases in damage ratios you can see here. We have the passive bonus of damage reduction. We have this big overpowering increase here. Bleed damage from critical damage bonus, walking arsenal, Berserking damage increase and unconstrained. The legendaries look like they're sticking to the same as well. Ancestral Force is getting an increase. Thorns is getting an increase, which is actually quite interesting. Core skills cost to refund increase as well here. Unrelenting Fury cost refund now also grants bonuses to monsters. So I'm not really seeing anything in here. And look, they do have that Earthquake damage reduction while in Earthquake increased as well from 515 to 1525. So that's a nice increase in terms of damage reduction. And the damage bonus in Earthquake is increased as well. They were talking about how they actually want to get away from basically the flat damage codex items or just aspects in general being trash. So they're trying to fix some of that. And then you can see uniques here. The Fields of Crimson damage increased. Damage from enemies standing in the pool increased. Rupture cooldown affix replaced with bonus critical strike damage. So they are effectively attempting to make their uniques actually usable. You can see the Hellhammer one was the one they talked about before, where they're going to replace crowd control with bonus critical strike damage, which is, again, a much better multiplier. Physical damage affix replaced with vulnerable for Ramaladi Magnum Opus. Good lord, I butchered that one. 100,000 steps attacks reduce evades cooldown affix replaced with bonus evade charges. That is actually significantly better. And then damage against stun affix replaced with bonus movement speed. So that is actually significantly better. And then we have basic skill damage affix replaced with cooldown reduction. You know what's interesting to me is they like nerf things like cooldown reduction with the bonus critical strike, but even they recognize that you have to have these as the modifiers. So now instead of giving them the new buffed crowd control enemy or physical damage or something like that, they go right back to where we're all pigeonholed. So it's not actually, I mean, the modifiers were a problem in the previous patch, but we're all pigeonholed. We have to have vulnerability. We have to have bonus critical strike damage. Even they recognize that in order to make items good, they basically have to add that, which is why they add vulnerable damage here and bonus critical strike damage. So I just wanted to call that out and see that's kind of funny. We're trying to get away from these things, but then they realize in order for items to be good, they have to literally add them on there. So I think that obviously we probably missed the mark in terms of like actually trying to change the way things are. And hopefully we see changes to things like overpowering, etc. Now, I know the rogues were getting some changes. There was a couple of these that I thought were kind of nice. I'm not going to go through all of these, which is the Siphoning Strikes. Lucky hit chance increased from 75 to 85%. I know people were saying Siphoning Strikes was quite important and you couldn't really use it as much anymore. So at least that got a little bit of a buff. The Elusive Menace, no longer you have to be close to them. And then you automatically drop a smoke grenade at the end of dash. Smoke grenade reduces cooldown by 0.4 to 0.6 seconds per target, up to 2-3 seconds. So only a couple of small changes on the legendaries. And then on the uniques here, all stat affix replaced with vulnerable damage. So once again, we add that. And then ultimate damage replaced with cooldown, which is the third one. They nerfed cooldown, vulnerable, and critical strike damage, and they're adding those affixes right back on the uniques in order to make them good. So I think that's still kind of funny. So Druid is I'm obviously going to be interested in. Spirit gain, I'm never going to complain about getting more spirit. You can argue whether it's enough, but I always like seeing more spirit. We have buffs to wolves because of the companion druid is basically trash. So we have buffs across the board that looks like to try to make everything from ravens, etc. better. I do like this one, which is rabies. The damage over time increased from 76 to 110%. That's a pretty significant buff in my own personal opinion. So I like to see that because I think rabies is a build that how do we put it? The damage over time stuff now doesn't really feel as good as just flat damage because you literally have to wait for it to happen. And if you can one-shot a mob, why would you want to one-shot a mob and then wait for them to die from the bleed unless we're talking like Poison Rogue or something? So I actually quite like seeing this and Poison Creeper, etc. People have been using just to add poison just in order to get like the Envenom procs, etc. from multiplying type of damage. So it's cool to see we have some more poison options potentially being added here. Paragon Lightning Resilience Rare Node. Okay, so it goes from 4% to 6%. So maximum life bonus being increased. It'll be interesting how this pairs with Temerity, since Temerity is now off maximum life. So maybe maximum life's getting a little bit better here. Legendaries, Aspect of Metamorphic Stone. Spirit cost reduced. The damage dealt 80 to 100% to 120. That's actually pretty decent. And then we have Aspect of the Alpha going from 75-100 to 90-150. Okay. So a smaller 15% bump up there. And then Restore Gain on Mango Ad Spec going from 1 to 3. That's a pretty significant change in terms of resource gain. Not sure if that's going to be enough that it makes me super excited by that, but that's actually, I mean, maybe it does actually. A 3x multiplier on that, go from 1 to 3. Okay. And then we have the class overload mechanic, the lightning one there. Lucky hit chance from 20-40%. I don't really think I've ever seen anybody use that. I don't know if anyone's going to use it now. Maybe. Doesn't feel like I would still want to use that, but let's continue here. Sorcerer is going to be the other major change they were talking about. Obviously, they're doing the same things it looks like that they said they were going to do in the previous campfire chat, which is effectively Firebow generates mana now, casting Fireball increased duration, critical strike damage increase. They're basically buffs across the board for fire and lightning. Again, if you want to see all of the breakdown, you want to talk about all this more in detail, you can come by the live stream. There are a lot of changes in here, but effectively the TLDR of all of this was it looks like they're trying to make lightning and fire better. Ice Shard seems to be like the build that everyone's using for Sorcerer, so they're trying to add more things in there for variety. Also, if you take a look at this, you're going to notice damage reduction increases, a lot of these within the Paragon boards. They're trying to give Sorcerer some innate damage reduction itself, since it seems to be like a fairly squishy class. So I do like to see Sorcerers getting some love. A lot of changes in these patch notes here. Now let's look at the uniques because I'm curious about this. The damage penalty of the Gloves of Luminaire reduced from 65-55 to 45-35, so they're trying to get that to proc. Damage to stun affixes replaced with the lucky hit change to resource. Okay, so they're going from while stunned to lucky hit change. You grab additional resources. Sort of like the Bone Spear Necromancer. This would be a best in select type of glove affix where you would attempt to restore your primary resource from the lucky hit. It was pretty necessary. I think that this is probably a smart change, and the Luminaire's first bounce occurs much closer to the player as well. So now we have damage penalty reduction, and the first bounce happens more often, so they're trying to get that extra damage to proc more often is what it looks like to me. We're going to go through just very briefly the last Necromancer one here because I've been playing a lot of Necromancer, and then we're going to move on to these standard gameplay changes. So Enhanced Bone Spirit, yep, they're sticking to the same one. Cooldown reduction is by an extra second. It looks like this is all of the same they've announced prior. Willpower requirement bonus reduced from 50 to 40 for Wither. Bonus damage per 40 willpower increased from 2.5 to 4%. And as we go through here, Sever. This was a smart change where they're changing the way Sever's aspect works, where there's an aspect that when you crit with Sever, you have a chance to spawn Blight Pool. So you can kind of double dip and get both Blight and Sever at the same time. Now this just has a raw chance of happening. That way you don't have to build around critical strike in order for this to happen. The reason for this is damage over time effects cannot crit, so there's no reason to build a character into crit to get damage over time effects to proc when those damage over time effects to proc can't crit anyway. You're building a dead stat, so this is actually a pretty nice change in my own personal opinion. These, however, the big ones, the aspect of exposed flesh is now a lucky hit 10% chance to generate 30 to 50 essence when hitting a vulnerable enemy. So this is a significant difference over it only working on bone abilities. And those bone ability, this was basically the best and rarest aspect. This many people didn't get this till way later. I got my first one in 96 on my Necromancer. And this is going to be a pretty big change, to be honest with you, because we're all going to group people up with vulnerability with things like Corpse Tendrils. With it having to be vulnerable, it means like you're going to need the Frozen Mages that apply vulnerable, or you're going to need the Corpse Tendrils in order to actually get this to work. But most people use the Corpse Tendrils anyway, especially with the new cage chart, so it shouldn't be as big of a problem. And then Decay is getting a pretty small damage buff there. I like this one. The aspect of Torment Essence regeneration goes from 2030 to 9170. So even the minimum is 3x of the previous maximum. So I love seeing that because the essence regeneration, you didn't actually feel this at all. I tried using this aspect for a while. I couldn't feel it. So now I am excited to see if this is actually any good. The hulking aspect here, a legendary category change from resource to utility. Oh, that's interesting. Chance for Golem to reduce its cooldown, chance for Golem to spawn the corpses both got increased. I think they're trying to buff the Golem a little bit because the Golem, it takes its own spot on the skill bar and therefore is de-incentivized to use it. And then this one, they're changing to the same. The Greaves of Empty Tomb, they're making bonus movement speed on the boots. This is smart. Movement speed is something you need as a Necromancer because you have no mobility. And then Balrog, Fire Breath, and these elite affixes, Fire Enchant, Electrified, and Shock Lance are no longer basically going to insta-gap your minions. If you didn't know before, the Balrog would be spawning in things like Overworld events, etc. And it's very frustrating because he would choose Fire Breath and he procs so much damage so consistently, it would blow right through your minions because the minions have a passive that allows you to eat certain amounts of percentage of damage as a cap per hit, but because the Balrog hits so often, it just shreds right through the minions anyway. So they're kind of changing this so your minions don't just get wiped out by a normal mob. Now, the part we care about, gameplay updates. Okay. Monster density. We are increasing monster density in Nightmare Dungeons and in Hell Tides. This is the really big one here. This is what we're excited by. I physically counted the red dots. It seems about 50%. They say bosses level 60 and more will have more health. Below 60 remain unchanged. 80 will have 50% increase, 100, 100% increase, 120, 120, and 150, 150% increased health. I think that's fine. I think bosses die as fast as elite mobs, and it's a little weird. And then level 35 and higher boss monsters have a 100% chance to drop legendary items. This is a big W. Treasure goblins now have an increased legendary drop chance from 6 to 14. So early killing treasure goblins are better now. And then you're guaranteed at 15 plus to get a legendary. This is good because treasure goblins felt terrible. I'm going to be honest. This is actually a good change. I'm really excited by that one. Legion events are now more rewarding, guaranteed legendary drops starting at 35, so there's more reasons to do those. Now you see them as low dopamine legendary drops. You love to see that, especially early when legendaries were still kind of hard to get. They made multiple improvements on how damage and other effects interact with active barriers. So bonus damage or bonus effects that applied on hit or when dealing damage will now apply that same effect through barriers. Oh, that is cool. Okay, because like remember before you have the butcher show up and you have a big shield and you can't do like your bonus effects, etc. So example, the exploit Paragon Griff will now apply vulnerable to enemies that have an active barrier. So that's a pretty big change. Cheat Death will now work properly when the player has an active barrier. This also affects PvP play. Wait, Cheat Death effects will now work properly when the player has an active barrier. I didn't know that the cheat death effects weren't working for this. This is actually good for me to know. I'm going to be honest. I'm kind of glad I read that there. Varsham will now break through any bone wall segments he dashes through. That makes sense. You can't pin him in. Cost of refunding skill and Paragon points has been reduced. This is what they're talking about, the respec and cost reduction. And they said it starts at smaller, lower levels and hits a maximum of 40% at level 100. So it's 40% of what it used to be. Basically, example, level 50 is 12%, 60 is 18%, 70 is 24%, and 80 is 30%. So these are significant reductions in up to a 40% reduction here in terms of cost to respec. I think that's quite good. We've increased the stack limit from elixirs to 2099. Yep, that seemed good. Additional stash tab can now be purchased with stash code, so we actually get new stash tabs. Very exciting. We have restored the cast time to leave dungeons back to 3 seconds. This was an issue they said was ability to use as a method of easy escape, particularly for hardcore players. We found that their change outweighed the downside of the game feeling less responsive. So we've heard your feedback on revising this. Basically, they took an L on this one because people didn't like this. I thought it was a dumb change personally. Malignant Hearts here. Yep, this is the one they talked about before, the Caged Heart of Spell Breaking. Upon taking elemental damage, you now gain 10 to 20% reduction for 5 seconds. And then Temerity, this is the change, like I was mentioning earlier in this video, that is going to be based upon maximum life as well. So it looks like this, they actually stayed very tight to the gameplay changes they mentioned. So we did get a pretty good communication early about what these patch notes are actually going to be, and it looks like they stayed pretty true to that. Some bug fixes here. I'm not going to go through all of these. It looks like there's a pretty good amount of bug fixes. I will say there's one other bug at the moment that I'm not going to explain how to do, but from what I understand, there's currently an active bug in the game that eternal characters are trading with seasonal characters and dumping gold and stuff like into that. I know there was a drama going on about that, so I think they're probably working on that as well. If you want to discuss these patch notes in more detail, or if you have questions, come on by the live stream, which will be in the description as well as the pinned comment. But in terms of these balance changes, these are what they said they were going to have in the game. They stuck pretty much true to these. I don't really see any changes in any of these characters that weren't things they said they were going to have happen. I think we got a few more listed in terms of uniques from the Barbarian because they absolutely needed this. This patch will be coming out on the 8th. It's just the patch notes today. So on the 8th, this will be a patch that will be live into the game and we can all experience these changes. And at that time, I think it'll be about time for me to finally play and try out the Barbarian, as we'll see if it's a good experience from the beginning. With that being said, I love you all. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for subscribing, and I'll see you on the live stream.